away from her! I didn't touch her, I swear!
She's right, you liar.
In the rugged peaks of the Absaroka Range, there lived a mountain man named Cade Rollins, whose face was a twisted map of scars from a cougar attack that had taken his eye and his faith in humanity. He lived alone in a cabin perched above a silver creek, trading pelts for coffee and avoiding the stares of townsfolk who crossed the street when they saw his ruined visage approaching. One autumn, a traveling peddler told him of a girl being sold off in the settlement of Broken Bow, a mute orphan that her uncle claimed was too much trouble to feed and clothe. Something stirred in Cade's chest, a deep ache for the outcast, so he rode 3 days down the mountain with a pouch of silver coins and a battered heart, intending only to look. Before you hear the words that stunned an entire saloon into dead silence, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a single tale from West Old Stories Official. When Cade arrived at the dusty crossroads, he found a slip of a girl with wild, dark hair and eyes that spoke volumes, though her lips had never once parted in speech since the day her parents perished in a wagon fire. Her uncle, a greasy man named Silas Polk, hawked her like a mule, demanding $50 for the mute burden, and the girl stood trembling with her head bowed, clutching a tattered shawl. Cade stepped forward, his scarred face barely hidden by his hat brim, and the crowd recoiled, but the girl lifted her eyes and looked at him without flinching, as if she recognized a fellow soul who lived behind a mask of suffering. He paid the uncle every last coin, then extended his rough hand to her, and she took it with a grip that was surprisingly strong and warm, and they walked to his horse without a word exchanged. All the way up the mountain trail, she rode behind him, her arms loosely around his waist, and he felt a strange peace settle over him for the first time since the cougar had torn his world apart. At the cabin, he gave her his bed and took the floor, and in the morning, he found she had already stoked the fire and made coffee, communicating with gestures and nods that were more eloquent than many spoken conversations he had endured. She taught him simple hand signs, pointing to the bread and making a breaking motion, and he found himself smiling, an expression that pulled his scars into deep grooves but didn't frighten her in the slightest. Weeks turned into months, and the girl, whose name he learned was Ilara from a locket she wore, filled the cabin with wildflowers and the scent of stew, and the silence between them became a comfortable language of its own. He would read aloud from an old Bible at night, and she would sit at his feet, her eyes wide and her hand resting on his knee, and he swore he could feel her heart beating in rhythm with his own. One evening, as the first snow fell, he took her to the porch and pointed to the stars, telling her the names he'd made up for constellations, and she laughed, a soundless laugh that shook her shoulders and made him feel 10 feet tall. He never once asked her to speak, for he believed she couldn't, and he loved her just as she was, a silent, gentle presence that had turned his lonely existence into a sanctuary of warmth and understanding. But deep within Ilara's throat, the voice box was perfectly intact, and her muteness was not a physical affliction, but a prison built from the terror of that long-ago fire that had stolen her family and sealed her lips with guilt. She had tried to scream when the flames engulfed the wagon, but no sound came, and ever since, she had believed that her voice was a cursed thing that would only bring more pain if she dared to use it again. Cade, unknowing, continued to protect her fiercely, and when spring came, he decided they would ride into Broken Bow for the first time as man and wife, for he had asked her to marry him with a carved ring, and she had nodded yes with tears streaming down her cheeks. The townsfolk stared as the giant scarred man walked with a dainty mute bride on his arm, and whispers of the beast and his silent mouse slithered through the dusty streets like snakes. They entered the saloon to buy a celebratory drink, and a group of drunken cowhands at the bar, led by the uncle Silas Polk, who had been spending his ill-gotten silver, began to hoot and jeer at the grotesque couple. Silas, emboldened by whiskey, staggered over and poked a finger at Cade's scarred face, sneering that a monster like him could only find a wife who was broken and dumb, and he laughed so hard his belly shook. Cade's fist clenched, but before he could react, Alara stepped in front of him, her slight body a shield, and she fixed her blazing eyes on her uncle with an intensity that made the room go quiet. Then, for the first time in nearly a decade, Alara opened her mouth and let out a voice so clear and pure it cut through the tobacco smoke like a church bell at dawn. And she said, "He is not the monster here. You are. And everyone who stood by while you sold a child deserves the same shame." The saloon froze. The piano player's hands hovered midair, glasses halted halfway to lips, and even the flies seemed to stop buzzing as every soul in that room stared at the mute bride who had just spoken words of fire. Silas Polk's face drained of color, and he stumbled backward into a spittoon, splashing tobacco juice down his trousers, while the other cowhands gaped as if seeing a ghost rise from the floorboards. Alara continued, her voice trembling but gaining strength with each syllable, declaring that she had chosen silence because words were too precious to waste on cruel people, but now she would speak for the man who had loved her without condition. Cade stood behind her, his one good eye wet with tears, and he realized that all this time he had not been protecting her. She had been gathering her courage to protect him when the moment demanded it. She told the saloon that her husband's scars were marks of survival and bravery, and that she would shout his goodness from every rooftop if necessary, because true beauty resides in the soul, not in unblemished skin. The townsfolk, shamed by her words and the courage of the woman they had dismissed, began to murmur in agreement, and one old-timer rose to his feet and applauded, quickly joined by the rest until the saloon shook with clapping. Silas Polk slunk out the back door, never to be seen in Broken Bow again, and the sheriff, who had witnessed the whole affair, tipped his hat to Alara and Cade, declaring that their courage had cleansed the town of a long-standing blight. Cade took his wife in his arms, and she buried her face against his chest, weeping not from sorrow but from the release of a decade of pent-up silence, and he held her with the tenderness of a man who finally understood the depths of her strength. They finished their drink at the bar, the bartender refusing their coin, and every patron lined up to shake Cade's hand and curtsy to Alara, promising that from that day forward no outcast would be mistreated in their town. As they rode back to the high country, Alara talked for the entire journey, her voice growing rusty then rich, telling Cade of her childhood, her fears, and the moment she first saw his face and knew she had found a home for her wounded heart. Cade listened, captivated, and he found that her voice was the most beautiful melody he had ever heard, a river of sound that washed away his years of loneliness and made the mountains themselves seem to lean closer to eavesdrop. From that day on, Alara spoke freely around the cabin, and Cade would often pause in his chores just to hear her sing old hymns while she kneaded dough, her voice echoing against the pines like a promise fulfilled. They had 2 sons, both of whom inherited their mother's gift of speech and their father's courage, and they grew up hearing the tale of the day their mama froze a saloon with words that changed a community's conscience. The scarred mountain man never again saw pity or revulsion in a stranger's eyes. Instead, he saw respect, for everyone knew he had won the love of a woman whose silence was a fortress she had chosen to lower only for him. Alara often told visitors that her husband's face was the most handsome in the territory because it was a canvas of his trials, and she would trace the scars with her fingers each night, whispering gratitude for the cougar that had led him to her. Their cabin became a way station for the lost and the broken, and Cade and Alara would welcome them with coffee and hard-won wisdom, proving that the most outcast souls could create the most radiant love and the most enduring legacy. Years later, when the railroad came through and Broken Bow grew into a proper town, the new church was named St. Alara's Chapel in honor of the mute bride whose first words had sparked a revival of kindness that spanned a generation. Cade and Alara attended the dedication, now gray and weathered, and she spoke a few words to the congregation, her voice as steady as a mountain stream, reminding them that silence can be a sanctuary, but speech can be a sword for justice. The old-timers who remembered that day in the saloon wept openly, and young couples seeking a blessing would come to their porch, asking the scarred man and the once mute woman to impart the secret of a love that had transformed a wilderness. Cade would chuckle and say it was simple. He had bought a bride with silver, but she had purchased him back with a courage that no coin could ever measure, and her first words had been the key that unlocked a lifetime of shared freedom. In the twilight of their lives, they still walked hand in hand along the creek, and Cade sometimes joked that he missed the quiet days, earning a playful swat from Alara, who now never stopped talking about everything she saw, from bird songs to cloud shapes. They passed within a week of each other, unable to exist without the other's presence, and the town of Broken Bow closed all shops on the day of their funeral, a tribute to the mountain man and his bride, who had taught them what it meant to truly listen. On their shared tombstone, beneath a carved cougar and a singing lark, the epitaph read, "He gave her a home, and she gave him a voice that silenced a saloon and awakened 1,000 hearts." The story of the scarred mountain man and his mute bride who spoke fire in a saloon has been passed down through generations, a testament that love can heal the deepest wounds and that the quietest among us may hold the loudest truths. If this tale of a voice that broke chains and a love that defied all cruel judgment moved your spirit, then slam that like button. Share this video with a friend who needs a dose of frontier courage, and let us know in the comments what you would have said in that saloon. Subscribe to West Old Stories Official and ring that bell, because the untamed frontier still echoes with legends of redemption and wild grace. And the next story might just be the one that changes your own heart forever.